All right, welcome in everyone. My name is Camille. Thank you for being here. This is our first True Tuesday of 2021. So really excited to be sharing this space with you all. Our session for today is part one of our interviews with social justice workers when hate comes to town. Really, really excited about this conversation and this panel. And I see a lot of you are also excited about this. I'm not going to take up a whole lot of time setting context, but I think that this is very timely conversation for what we've experienced as a nation and as a country over this past, week or so, maybe a little bit longer. And our tradition that is set to happen tomorrow. And so really looking forward to bearing witness and hearing what our panelists have to say today, and hearing from all of you as far as your questions and our opportunities to engage. So welcome in. We like to start with just an opportunity for us to get present. We are in this Zoom age now where we are often going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. So just gives us an opportunity to get present, to focus in, and really be able to engage in the very important discussion and conversation topics that True Tuesdays bring. So I'm going to invite you to get comfortable. So come to a comfortable position. If you're seated, get comfortable in your chair. If you're standing, you could lay down too if that works for you right now. And just going to take a moment to invite you to notice your breath. Don't have to do anything to alter it or change it at this time. Just recognize that it's there. Notice what rises as you inhale and what lowers as you exhale. I'm going to invite us to take 3 collective breaths together. So I'll count out the first one, and then we can feel into the second and third. Just take a deep breath in on the count of 3. Make this first breath the biggest breath that you've taken all day. The biggest breath that you've taken yet today. Really fill those lungs up completely. And we'll do it on 1, 2, 3. Deep breath in. And exhale. Exhale through your mouth if that's comfortable. Keep your belly soft and relaxed. Another deep breath in. Exhale, belly soft and relaxed. Let those shoulders drop from your ears. And one more collective breath. Deep breath in. And exhale. Thank y'all for that. I know that helps me get grounded. I hope that helps you get grounded as well. Just want to take a few moments, just in case there are folks who are joining us for the first time. Even if you are joining us for subsequent time, sometimes it's good to just get a reminder. This is our purpose. And I guess I would just add to this that our highest aspiration and aspirations are that this is a co-learning space, a space of connection and relationship, and also of action, to disrupt ideologies and structures and systems of oppression, so that rural Minnesota can be safe, inclusive, and prosperous for all. And we also recognize that there's a range of experience amongst all of us with regard to our engagement in the work of equity. But we know that it's a journey and not a destination. So we're all continuing to learn, and we welcome and support practitioners at all levels and in all types of engagements. So you're welcome here. This is a community. Our rational aims are up here very tangibly today. We'll be bearing witness to and listening from those who have firsthand experience with countering hate incidents and groups in their communities. And you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as we go throughout. I will be fielding those and making sure that your questions get answered. Additionally, experiential aims, we recognize and acknowledge the importance of leveraging all of our wisdom centers in this work. And so with that, we hope that in addition to putting something on your mind, that we also put something on your heart, and that you have some motivating and moving experiences as well, so that this is not just an intellectual exercise, but it's an exercise where you're inspired also. And then as we move into our conversation, want to highlight our 4 agreements. So our 4 agreements are to stay engaged, and really just recognizing that our society has historically been given permission to disengage from conversations about race or, various other identities. So making a commitment to stay engaged rather than leaving when things get uncomfortable will ensure that important conversations actually happen. And we can do that in this community. Experiencing discomfort is about acknowledging that discomfort is inevitable in this work, especially in conversations about the topics around equity. And so recognizing that, but also recognizing that it's through dialogue, even when we're uncomfortable, that learning can happen, healing can happen, and change can begin. Speaking your truth, asking that you enter this conversation with a willingness to share what's real for you, even when it's not real for others, right? Just respecting everybody's lived, learned experience. And that's a lot easier said than done, but I think that we can do that if we hold that these agreements together collectively. And then finally, expect and accept non-closure. We're likely not going to solve anything today. But today is really about engaging and identifying an action or 2 that we can take next to just continue to make progress and move forward along in our journey and in our path towards equity. And so with that, if we can hold those together, I think we'll have a fantastic time, as we have since our beginning here. I'm going to go ahead and not hold up this great discussion any further. I'm going to introduce our moderator for today and have her introduce our guest panelists. But I'd like to first introduce Gail Anderson of EmpathyWorks, who has more than a dozen years experience building relationships among people of different faiths and cultures. She was the Director of Unity and Relationships at the Minnesota Council of Churches for almost 8 years. At the council, she designed a program called Taking Heart, which brings Muslim and Christians together for conversations and relationship building during Ramadan. She was also the lead designer of the statewide Respectful Conversations project, which brings people together in structured, reflective conversations to build empathy across difference. She is a graduate of the United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, where she also served on staff, founding the Interfaith and Intercultural Initiative. And with that, I turn it over to Gail.
Thank you, Camille. I am really excited to see all of those people in chat coming on, wanting to learn, wanting to make a difference in the world. It's really, it makes me feel great this afternoon. So as you all know, the title of today's session, When Hate Comes to Town, and we chose this topic months ago, but it's become even more relevant in our lives because of the events of January 6th at the US Capitol. And Among the shocking facts of that day was that the people responsible for security at the Capitol were not as prepared as they needed to be. And we will learn more about why that was in the coming months. But the people who stormed the building, they were prepared. They were organized, maybe not in a traditional hierarchical way, but through social media networks and affinity groups. They knew why they were there and what they came to do. And we underestimated them. So too often the people who advocate on behalf of equity, pluralism, creating welcoming communities are not adequately prepared to counter the hateful messages and activities that occur in their town. We have 3 presenters today who have firsthand experience encountering hate in Minnesota, but there could have been many more guests. Here are some others that didn't make it into the program today. Beltrami County last year made national news by being one of a couple counties in the entire country to ban refugee resettlement in their county. When one county commissioner asked how many people supported the ban at the meeting, most people in the room raised their hand because those people against refugees were organized and they were ready to make their voices heard. A school referendum was defeated in the Eastern Carver County School District because the opposition chose to characterize the referendum as nefarious and produced and distributed a slick video against equity education. They were organized and funded, and the information about the groups that fought that referendum are included in the report, The Propaganda Mill, which was included in the materials sent to you before this meeting. And about 18 months ago, the State Department of Human Rights had to postpone an event about countering hate in St. Cloud because of concerns of safety after a group vowed to protest. The group that was protesting claims to be against abortion, gender identity training, and the infiltration of radical Islam in all phases of education and the American government. Again, the protesters were organized and the event had to be rescheduled. So if you take one thing away from this session, it is that you need to be organized and ready for a response before hate comes to town. I mean, I know it's already there for some of you, but that's what we're trying to get you thinking about. So we're going to hear some ideas today, but we are also having this meeting in dangerous times. I want you always to be thinking about your safety when you're preparing to counter hate in your community. So this is hard and emotional stuff to talk about. Hate isn't intellectual, it's visceral. So I'm going to start us off and set the tone with a poem. This poem is called Hymn. It's like the kind of song you sing in church, a hymn. And it's written by Sherman Alexie, who's a Native American man of Spokane and Shitsuts heritage. He grew up on the Spokane Indian Reservation. He's a poet and a novelist and a screenwriter. It's a long poem, and I'm going to put a link to it in the chat, so because some of you are going to go, can we have a link to that? Yes, you can. The poem is called Hymn, and this is just the ending of it, the conclusion of it, by Sherman Alexie. My friends, I am not quite sure what I should do. I am as angry and afraid and disillusioned as you. But I do know this, I will resist hate. I will resist. I will stand and sing my love. I will use my fist to drum and drum my love. I will write and read poems that offer the warmth and shelter of any good home. I will sing for people who might not sing for me. I will sing for people who are not my family. I will sing honor songs for the unfamiliar and new. I will visit a different church and pray in a different pew. I will silently sit and carefully listen to new stories about other people's tragedies and glories. I will not assume my pain and joy are better. I will not claim my people invented gravity or weather. And oh, I know I will still feel my rage and rage and rage, but I won't act like I'm the only person on stage. I am one more citizen marching against hatred. Alone, we are defenseless. Collected, we are sacred. We will march by the millions. We will tremble and grieve. We will praise and weep and laugh. We will believe. We will be courageous with our love. we will risk danger as we sing and sing and sing to welcome strangers. The line that always stands out for me in the work that I do is, I am one more citizen marching against hatred. Alone we are defenseless. Collected, we are sacred. There are far more people in the world who want to live in harmony with each other than who want to cause strife. Just remember that. So we have 3 guests today who are citizens who are marching against hatred, and they used to have firsthand experience with the complexity of organizing against a hate group that either shows up from out of town or rises up in their community. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of them so you know who's here, and then in more extended before they speak. So you'll have time for each of them and then have time for questions. If you have questions, please send that in the chat. I don't know if you can send it to Camille. I don't think it's set up that way. Oh, it is. It is. So send it to Camille in the chat, and she will collate those as we're going through our session, and then she will be able to facilitate that Q&A at the end when we're done with everyone. For our first guest, or our last guest who will speak, Victoria Guillemard is a native of Murdock, Minnesota. She's a graduate of Macalester College, and she's currently a student at Mitchell Hamlin Law School. Because of COVID, she moved home for virtual study. Soon Murdock became the center of controversy over a white supremacist group, the Asutru Folk Assembly, who bought a church in the town and wants to locate one of their religious centers in the city. And Victoria is organizing the local opposition to this group coming to town. Dane Skilbred is the pastor of discipleship for Vinje Lutheran Church in Willmar. He's also one of the founders of the Willmar Interfaith Network. In November of 2019, a Willmar area group booked a noted Islamophobic speaker, Usama Dakdak, to speak at the local elementary school. Dane's group organized a prayer vigil to reject the hate speech of the speaker, and he'll talk about that incident and what worked and what could have been improved. But first, we're going to hear from Jaylani Hussein. Jaylani and I speak on panels together a lot. He's the executive director of the Minnesota chapter of the Council of American Islamic Relations, also known as CAIR. CAIR is the North American's largest Islamic civil liberties and advocacy group and has 35 offices and chapters nationwide and in Canada. And CAIR's mission is to enhance understanding of Islam, encourage dialogue, protect civil liberties, empower American Muslims, and build coalitions that promote justice and mutual understanding. So Jaylani is at the center of countering hate and Islamophobia in the whole state of Minnesota. And so he's going to give you a little bit of an interview about the movements and incidents in Minnesota. So Jaylani, you are here?
Yes.
Yes, but by voice only?
No, I'm also, my camera's
Oh, there
on,
you are. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jaylani, let's start. How prevalent is hate in Minnesota?
So first of all, again, I really appreciate Blandon and everyone who put this event together, and I want to welcome everyone. I was watching where everybody's from, and so I'm really glad that all of you have joined. I think it's important right now to be in conversations about what we saw on January 6th. So January 6th, I think, was awakening for a lot of people. But Gail, for the last 12 years, I would say Muslims have been seeing January 6th or variations of January 6th appearing almost all the time. In fact, I would say the 8 years that President Obama was in is when we saw the complete shift in hate movement in this country, obviously all targeting President Obama, and obviously his father being a Muslim was a big rallying cry. In fact, that one of the things I usually ask in conversations is, most people don't know the Cordova Project, but they definitely know the Ground Zero Mosque, and that controversy was one of the first controversies created by this movement. And what we saw on January 6th is a culmination of that movement that I think President Trump utilized not only for his campaign, but also afterwards. And we saw that also here in Minnesota, very alive and well. In fact, I think of all of our 35 chapters across the country, I think Minnesota is now becoming an epicenter for targeted Islamophobia, which means national attention toward Minnesota. And it's predominantly to try to push back against what they see as Islamatization of Minnesota, whether they see Congressman Keith Ellison and now Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and obviously a robust and a very visible Muslim population here in Minnesota. So when we talk about Minnesota, we have had our share of hate from the bombing that happened in 2017, where Illinois men who are now charged and convicted of this crime of driving from Illinois in the middle of the night, avoiding tollways and highways and going to come and bomb the mosque there, to what's been happening in places like Bemidji and everywhere else. So I would say we have our share of quite number of hate movements here, and it's been becoming even much more prevalent. And it's not even close when it comes to the urban-rural divide. The overwhelming majority of organizing is much more prevalent in rural Minnesota, in greater Minnesota, than it is in the Twin Cities. And so, as you mentioned, the St. Cloud hate event that was canceled was a kind of an idea of kind of what's going on, because we had the FBI and the police department were on that panel, and they deemed it not to be safe for us to be in a conversation. So for everyone who's on the call today, I guess one of the first things I can go over really briefly is kind of the kind of what are the tools that they're using, what is their end goal, and finish off with what are ways to respond to that. So are we still all here? I don't know, I just heard something in. Okay. All right. So I guess the first part is, what are the tools? So since 2008, since President Obama, we have noticed that the predominant tools that these groups use are usually social media. And that's where the traditional hate groups that we usually know on the Southern Poverty Law Center's website are no longer the more relevant groups. So as you know, in Willmar, there's a group called The Word that became a kind of the organizing force in Willmar. But even before them, there was a group from St. Cloud that came over to Willmar who tried to create a group for them called Willmar First. These groups are usually not hitting the SPLC's website. So traditionally, the groups that now you're seeing are unincorporated. They don't have a website. They're usually much more clandestine than that. But they become more powerful by using these tools. So number one tool is speakers. So they will bring Osama Duck or a bunch of other these national speakers, whether they bring them in person or they bring their DVD, they will try to hold an informational and awareness event. After that, and obviously organizing on social media, one of the things that they usually utilize is the local media, whether they either write an op-ed, and right now in the state of Minnesota, the average has come down a little bit, but we're actually at 30-1%. So 30-1 ratio, 30 negative op-eds against the Muslim community around hate to 1 positive. And the reason why most people don't really know that, it's majority of these op-eds are written in rural communities.
And these are like letters to the editor, not from the editors of the newspaper. These are people.
Yes. So these are letters to the editor, and they don't try to even rewrite it. So we noticed that they're writing the exact same article with the same grammatic errors that is being also published in Florida, right? So they're not even trying to be smart about it. They're just pushing stuff out. So they use that, and then obviously in events like you saw in Willmar and other places, when they do an event, they bait the community in. So they used to do that with us at CAIR, where they would try to put the event out there. And as you know, in greater Minnesota, news travels fast. And so if all of a sudden you hear, oh, there's this big controversial speaker coming, and right, so they utilize that momentum. And usually what we have noticed is 2 articles instead of 1. Usually in most incidents, there's 1 article. The event happened and here's who came and who were, right? But they usually write a precursor article. That brings up steam. Papers love that because everybody's hitting on that, clicking on that article. And then that builds that momentum. So people who've never heard about this group will learn about it. And that controversy around it will create some sort of legitimacy, as you probably could understand. So that's another tool that they use. What are their end goals? Usually their end goals are about legislation, right? And so we saw that in the state of Minnesota, where they want to stop refugees from coming in. right? So this conversation about refugee resettlement didn't start when President Trump came in. This was during the Obama administration, where you had speakers going to rural Minnesota, someone like Ron Braxton from St. Cloud, who's a car salesman, to folks like Duck Duck. And they were going around to all of these rural communities and telling them of how the Lutheran social services and these groups are forcing immigrations to come in. And so guess what? In the 2018 election in the state of Minnesota, you saw immigration and stopping refugee resettlement as a top priority for a governorial race. It didn't come out of a vacuum. It was this well-orchestrated, both national and local level legislation demand. On top of that, it's these other ideas about stopping Muslims. For example, Muslims want to create a new Sharia law or whatever. So those are some of the policies that they push. So the tools that they're using, the media, very powerful, right? They're organizing on social media. They're organizing in spaces that you traditionally have been organized for other more conservative spaces like VFWs and other places like that. And also conservative churches as well. And we've noticed that that has been a big part of the conversation. We have actually had a church, I can't think of the name, but in rural Minnesota, which the entire church flopped because the pastor would not stop bringing the speaker. So the entire deacons and everybody in the church resigned. And so that's something we're seeing. Now, what we also have noticed is that they're traditionally targeting areas where there is almost no Muslims. So if you look at Minnesota, it's the Arrowhead region that we see this overwhelming anti-Muslim work. So there's a woman in Bagley, Minnesota, who literally was the driving force of what we saw in Bemidji. In fact, we saw a great deal of hostility in Bemidji, but the Muslim population is very small. Less than probably 50 people is what we anticipate, between 50 to 100. And most of them actually are doctors who come in and serve the community. We have doctors who land in Bemidji and leave within the week because patients would be not, they would refuse to work with them. And so this is the kind of momentum that we saw. This is how these groups organize. We have been fighting them for a great deal of long time. Where we are losing the battle, and I think Gail mentioned it, everybody's mentioned it, is everyone believes that this just happens out of some sort of vacuum. It is organized, it is organized, it is organized. And if we don't counter-organize, and counter-organize, it doesn't mean we confront them. It means that we educate community about them. And so I'll leave you with this by one of the best ways we can organize is, number one, we don't combat hate with more knowledge in per se. That's our natural tendency. Our natural tendency is what they just don't know. The reality is Islamophobes and what we're seeing now with the QAnon movement, it's not that they're absent of knowledge. It's not like if you give them some information, they will all of a sudden be in line. There will be some people who will do that. But the organizers and the groups that are leading that's not how the confrontation will be helpful. What is more important is to educate the public about these groups, to educate how they're harmful, how they are not the mainstream. And most importantly, one thing I keep telling people is the good old knock it off. Tell people to just knock it off, and it works. And because what we have noticed is that you have two people talking to each other about a subject matter that both of them have nothing to know about, which is, for example, Islamophobia. They'll talk about something in Islam and this other group will respond, and both of them don't know anything about the subject matter, but there is a heated argument, right? But if you project and say, hey, knock it off, that is not right what you're saying, it's wrong. And these are the same tropes that have been used against the Catholics, like, with the Sharia, and I'll stop here. With the Sharia, for example.
You might think, can't you?
Yeah, I can hear your thing. Yeah. So with, for example,
go ahead. To add to that a little bit, Jaylani, I was going to talk about this later, but you've got to get intro to it. Number one, we see the same people popping up all over the place. It's the same names. This is not a million people who are organizing. They're organizing a lot of people, but it's the same instigators over and over and over in all places in the state, and we know their names. The other thing is there is a national organization, or maybe they're international, called Act for America, and they're a big Islamophobic organization. And they have on their website an individual activist manual. You can download it and find out how to get Islamophobia going in your area. One of the things they say is perception is reality. And one of their points is make it seem like everyone in your community agrees with you. doesn't say get everyone to agree with you. That's not their point. They just want the perception that everyone agrees with you. So in Bemidji, when the county commissioner said, how many people don't want refugees here? Everybody raised their hand. The whole county wants that, right? But that's not true. That's those people there who were there to say that. So the letters to the editor, yard signs, all the things that you can do to go, we're a welcoming community, changes that perception. So they're the outliers and everybody else is for equity, which is the truth. More people are wanting equity than want to be against it. So, well, thanks, Jaylani. I know you worked really hard. Oh, are you still talking? You're muted.
No, I was just gonna say that that's exactly right on, and we can answer some of the questions that folks have. I am gonna put a link on there for folks who might leave a little early. For those who want to learn more from CAIR, so we have an email list that you can sign up, and we'll send you more information on that. So I'll put that link on there for folks who want to continue those conversations. We do have some additional trainings that we go through, particularly around some of the subject matter.
Thanks, Jaylani. We're gonna sprint through this, and again, if you have questions right now, put them in the chat to Camille, and she will get those questions answered. So we're gonna move on to Pastor Dane Skilbred, who's at Vinje Church in Willmar, and soon after arriving there, he reached out to the local imam, and together with a few other people, they formed the Willmar Interfaith Network. So in 2019, Usama Dakdak came to town, and they presented a prayer vigil as the counter event to that. A little bit about Usama Dakdak. He's an Egyptian Christian evangelist, and he has a mission to lead people away from what he calls the lies of Islam. He speaks Arabic. He knows the Quran. He pulls things out of context. He does the translation himself, presents a very distorted version of Islam as the truth. And unfortunately, in a lot of areas, this is the first time the community hears about Islam. Here's a couple things that Dakdak has said in his presentations. And these are on video, so you can go see them. The day will come and Muslims in America will have the upper hand, and they will kill your children for not eating what is liked, for not eating the lawful foods. And then you have a revival in America among Muslims, and that's when they start beheading your children and your grandchildren. So, I mean, if you haven't heard one of these presentations, they're not mild. So Dane, you heard of some, well, first tell us about the network and how you organized before he even was on the horizon.
So I'll give a very quick rundown. I moved to Willmar in 2017 and moved to this community really wanting to experience the diversity that is here. And one of the first stories I heard was about a gentleman throwing pig's feet at a Somali stand at a farmer's market. And, heard members from my church really upset about this, and they wanted to get to know their Muslim, Somali, and East African neighbors. And so we tried a few different things to get something working there, and then finally sat down through some connections I had here with our local imam and some other pastors, and we said we really need to do better at meeting with one another. And so we started these monthly meetings, and then finally toward the end of 2018 we're given a grant through Blue Cross Blue Shield's Healthy Together initiative to fund the work we do. And so for the year in 2019, we were building all these events to allow people a chance to get to know their neighbors, and had simple things like, I want you to leave today with 2 new names and a story to tell from someone you didn't know before. And some of that relationship building happened all throughout the year. The local mosque for the previous 2 years had invited the community to an iftar dinner at the start of Ramadan to kind of dispel any myths there were about what Ramadan is. And we got to come alongside that. And we had our first big hate speaker come to town that summer in, I think, July. And as the Willmar Interfaith Network, we were still kind of a baby organization. I'd say we still are, but we're kind of trying to think, like, how do we respond to this? And I remember sitting at the table saying, well, I'll go and see what this person has to say and what probably lies they're spreading about us so that I can say something about that, and had some pushback from our fellow leaders saying, well, you shouldn't go, then people will think you support that. And I said, no, I'll make it clear that I don't support this. And so I went and had this wonderful experience of meeting a Muslim couple that was there, and wrote a note to them and apologized on behalf of their Christian neighbors, and then wrote an op-ed in the newspaper about this. And in the time since, I think that created some credibility for the Willmar Interfaith Network, that we're here to put a different face on who our Muslim neighbors are and what we're about as Christians and as interfaith neighbors in our communities. And so I think all of that laid the groundwork for Usama Dakdak coming to town that November, that people said, yes, this is unbelievable that these things happen in our town. And then it's called The Book Club, THEE, organizes events that basically stir up controversy and say Muslims are terrible people, and kind of what Gail described, they're trying to kill your children and all the other crazy myths you can think of. And we had this groundswell of people that were ready to meet Usama Dakdak as he came to our local elementary school. Not only the Willmar Interfaith Network, but our partners with Isaiah, and then just local leaders who had already been primed to be ready to see something like this happen. And by the way, all the upset parents who were disgusted that there was this anti-Islam speaker coming to their local school. And so I wish I could take credit for this, but we had some local leaders who were already primed and started Facebook pages to say, like, let's figure out a way to respond to this. And those partnerships evolved into, okay, you're going to do this, we'll do this. And so I was able to stand with our local imam and kick off the event with a prayer time and speaking about what we're about as a Christian leader, as a Muslim leader. And then the rest of the evening was 200 to 300 people showing up outside in the cold to kind of say we're about this in Willmar, as opposed to what Usama is doing.
So what was the community's reaction to your your prayer vigil?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of proud people that were just, they kind of got the word that we had 2 to 3 times as many people at our event out in the cold as were inside the elementary school. And I wish I could tell you that there was this groundswell of like, let's kick the book club out of town, but there hasn't been that. But I honestly think that group has been driven a little more underground, that they haven't been as visible for the last year and a half or two. We're in COVID time, so we'll see what happens over the next year or two. But some of the scholarship I hear is that by saying nothing, you give rise to the ability that this is the one voice. And so we've been doing our part to be a little proactive and to say we're going to put this positive voice out there and be ready when this comes. Overall, I do think there are a lot of wonderful, welcoming people, and I think there is a majority that are very supportive of our Muslim neighbors, but there's a very loud minority in Willmar, and we're doing our best to counteract that.
So Jaylani, I know you that these you have to be careful when you counter a person coming into town, right?
Yes.
It can add to fuel to the fire. So Dane, I think was it a prayer vigil? I mean, is that how you characterized it?
Yeah, I think that was the original intention. It turned into more than that. Several people speaking, both Christians and Muslims speaking from their faith. And so it became a little bit more what I would call a rally. But I want to say interspersed throughout that were times of prayer and times of song that made it more of a unifying event. rather than a reactionary event, I guess.
So one of the things, one of the options is to do a counter event, to not be a protest against the speaker, but to hold your own, which you characterized as a prayer vigil, to just have a different point of view there. But Jaylani, what can go wrong?
So this is something we learned at CAIR quite quite well. What we found out that is a lot of these groups actually will call the local paper first, and they will say, hey, we're bringing Osama Dakdak, and CAIR is not going to want us to be here. They'll stop us. So then the local reporter calls me and says, hey, by the way, Osama Dakdak is coming. And then so we challenge them. Then they write this controversial paper, which is pretty much free publicity. And this rural community then is turned upside down for that entire month and a half before the event happens. And people who never would have came would actually show up. And then on top of that, there's natural community reaction, which they don't want the speaker to be here. They don't want their Muslim community to feel threatened. And so they obviously, it turns into a controversy. Now, by the way, I've noticed this particularly in Willmar, that St. Cloud, which has been kind of sadly a hotbed for this activism, has been upset with folks in Willmar, because Willmar has been a more cohesion community, better than in other places. So they actually have been forcing folks in Willmar to organize. And that's why they did the Willmar First event, where they pushed the city council to push back against resolutions in Willmar. And so in this particular case, when a speaker comes to town, you do have two options. The first option is to silence the event as much as possible. And I'll give you an example. We had an event in Minneapolis at the university campus where some of the largest well-known Islamophobes who show up on Fox News, who some of them actually were Muslim, showed up. And we did our strategy of keeping as much silence of that event as possible, to the point where the student group at the university, the Muslim Student Association on campus, who learned about the event, did not alert their student body. And we wanted to keep it as on the DL as much as possible. The event turned out to be a flop because of that. They only had 15 people in the room. 5 were the MSA, or the Muslim students representatives. And then the 10 people were, 5 people were actually the entourage of the speakers, and 5 people who were there to listen, and the event completely failed. If we would have done the community, the opposite interaction, we could have had 200 people in the room, people protesting, police there. It would have turned in, especially in an urban area, it would have turned into a huge, huge deal, because all of the people are excited to challenge this one hate event. But actually, a lot of times, adding this fuel will continue to grow that manifestation. Because as Gail mentioned earlier, these groups are not that big of a group. They want to create the perception. They're also demographically much older. So I went to, for example, an event in a church event that were showing a DVD of this guy Hanadi in Cambridge, and I just sat in the back, and and then afterwards the folks came, and I said, "Hey, I'm one of those Muslims the guy was bashing. If you have questions, let me know." And the guy who organized it could not handle it, so he started screaming at me. They called the sheriff on me for just being in the room and listening. But I could tell the other people in the room there, they actually were surprised, and some of them felt ashamed, because they were just an older population who had nothing going on that day and wanted to just be part of some cookies and coffee and something like a show, right? But some of them just were upset. And that's the reality. The reality is these agitators, these leaders, do not have the buy-in of everybody. They're just creating the opportunity for a few people to show up. And that's why a simple thing as like knock it off may actually be more powerful than trying to engage with them in this debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We want to not give the perception that they're in the majority, that everybody agrees with them. So getting a lot of people out there. Also, a colleague of Jaylani and I, Tanisa Islam, who does a lot of this work in South Dakota in rural areas, said this is sometimes the first time these people actually get to meet each other, the people that are, standing together. So there's not like do a counter, don't do a counter. How do you do it? It's really think through how they might use it. Jaylani, one time you told me, they could take a little clip of, some Somali girl getting really upset and yelling, and then bam, that's on all their websites from now. So you need to be careful when you do it, but certainly you don't have to ignore or make them think that they're welcome there. So anything else, Dane, that I mean, you, as Jaylani said, you were organized and you had a group, and that frustrates the Islamophobes because there's so many of you in coming from different churches, different faith groups, different, that's frustrating.
If you don't mind, Gail, I'll add one more thing. So we actually have a strategy that we actually have. So if people are interested, we can provide. I may not have the time to go to details, but we actually want people to go to the event. That doesn't mean that we counter-organize. So we actually want people to go in the event, challenge the event, and be able to call out the people who showed up. Because one thing we also learned from some of our activists in rural Minnesota is that when you put pressure on events like this, they actually then, some of the more important folks or leaders in the community will not show up to a protested event. So your state legislator who would have been attending now won't attend because it's a heated event. And they'll actually have a private breakfast right the next day with the speaker. Mm-hmm. And then we all of a sudden, 2 months down the line, that same House of Representatives is now ushering an anti-Sharia bill. So that's how it works sometimes also when you put this kind of pressure. But I think sometimes also, maybe the first event you want to push out and be loud and bold. But the media piece is critically important. In fact, I refuse to respond to them. And then they go around me and find somebody else in the community who's not aware of these strategies, and they'll get that quote. Because if they can't get the other side's quote, they can't really print the article.
So our next session, which is in February, is about local media and how local media can be an ally. So if you're on this and you want to hear more about media strategies and what media can do, we can come to that. So I want to move on. Unless Dane, do you have something else to add?
I just wanted to piggyback right off Jaylani there that that has been the beauty here in Willmar, is there has been a groundswell of individuals that have pressured local leaders to say, we're not going to show up to this event, and we'll be very blunt with the book club and say, I'm sorry, I'm the mayor, I can't be there because I wouldn't be at this other event. And that's been a wonderful strategy that's worked for us too. So.
Thanks, Dane. Okay, Victoria, we've left you sitting there for a long time. So you went home because you thought you were just going to study your law at home, and then you found out this national story erupted in your hometown. So yeah. Let me do a little. So a Search for Folk Assembly is designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Their own website, they call themselves the Religion of Ethnic European Folk, part of the Great Aryan Religiosity. So they're not hiding who they are. They're white supremacists dedicated to protection of the white race. And they also call themselves a religion. So there's several kind of chapters in Minnesota, but this facility is to be a headquarters and a place where they gather lots of people. So tell me about finding out about this and then what you decided to do.
So I'm going to tell a little ha-ha as to how I found out about this. I'm a college student. I am currently in law school. And one of the things I've learned rather quickly in law school is the news distorts a lot of facts and information. And especially when it's something new and something that's coming out of an underground movement like the Asa True Folk Assembly. So I was sitting outside with my mother and she was on Facebook and she comes running to me. She goes, "Is this fake news? What is this? It says a group bought a church in Murdock." When that happens, usually I'll open the article, I'll read it, and I'll Google some terms and I'll try to figure out if it's real or fake news. And I use that term fake news as in, does it fit my liberal perspective? Because oftentimes it's conservative media that shows up on Facebook. The article was written by Sally Jo Sorensen on the Bluestem Prairie blog, which is a very reliable news source, and it talked about the Asa True Folk Assembly, and I had never heard of that. So I kind of did a quick Google search, their website popped up, and I read one of their statements of ethics, which stated that they believe in preserving the white family and that they promote white women and white men having white babies. I felt this absolute sense of dread and complete nervousness and helplessness, because this was now going to be 3 blocks away from my home. And as much as most people assume Murdock is an all-white town, it is definitely not. In fact, Pastor Skilbred, I'm sure you're aware, Murdock is only 18 miles west of you. I had to do directions in my head, but Murdock has a very vibrant immigrant community, and we have never had a hate group like this in our town. although I will not say that Murdock is inclusive in its nature or especially liberal, typically neighbors are very friendly and the community is a very tight-knit community. Unfortunately, this event has absolutely destroyed what was a very tight-knit community and turned it into a very divided and hostile environment for us. Our city council voted to grant the True Folk Assembly their conditional use permit so that they can use the property and hold religious ceremonies on site, because the building was originally designated as a residentially zoned area. And because of that vote, we now have a whole side of Murdock who are very much against this group, who disagree with their belief systems, and who are uncomfortable and scared. And then we have a whole other side of people who either are supportive of the First Amendment rights of this group, or they're very upset that we brought attention to this and that we're questioning the decisions of the city council. So what I ended up doing was organizing the Murdock Area Alliance Against Hate. It started as a grassroots citizen, or I should say resident-driven organization. And we've been working on education, community involvement, and just creating a safe space where people can come and learn about this, and then also where they can feel motivated and encouraged and safe to explore what the True Folk Assembly is and how they can fight white supremacy in their hometown.
So it's a tricky situation, right? Because they're a church, or they say they're a church, and so
they are a church. That's the frustrating part.
Yeah,
they have nonprofit religious organization status with the IRS, and the most frustrating part is heathenry is an actual religion. There are heathens across the country and across the globe. What makes this so difficult is that the True Folk Assembly is a singular congregation that has been universally denounced by all other heathen groups. And something that we also have been struggling with is the fact that this is a pagan-based religion. So a lot of people within the Murdock community and beyond are against the AFA because they are not a Christian organization, which I disagree with religious persecution. However, when you look at the AFA and you read their website, you'll see that they actively try to recruit and get people away from Christianity because they view it, and this is a direct quote from the founder, as a Jewish trick. So they are extremely anti-Semitic, extremely anti-Christian. And as with any group, if they are anti-Semitic and anti-Christian, they're also anti-Muslim. And that's very dangerous when we're only 18 miles away from a very large Muslim population in Willmar.
So what can you do? How can you make a difference?
So when we founded Murdock Area Alliance Against Hate, we wanted to focus on education and making people feel as if they had some agency as to what was happening in their community. We faced a lot of closed doors from our city council. They refused to speak to us. They refused to answer their phone. If we wrote letters, those letters would be thrown in the garbage. There was no communication between us and our city council. They pretty much flat out denied any communication with us about denying the permit. And we learned that it was because they were taking advisement from the League of Minnesota Cities. The League of Minnesota Cities is a great organization. However, there's a conflict of interest there. They are both the city as a municipality. They are both the advisory and also the insurance agent. So of course they're going to tell the city council to deny the permit. But we had to highlight that issue because that's a very, very confusing legal background thing that most people wouldn't know. Even as a student attorney, I had no idea that the League of Minnesota Cities did that. And I had to learn that and then educate everyone else about that.
So what next?
Education, which I know sounds really stupid, but just a show of hands, how many people know what the 14 words are? Does anyone know? That alone should be enough for me to do for the next year. Everyone should know, and anyone who didn't raise their hand, go home and Google the 14 words and read them. That is the key. The AFA operates solely on a recruitment basis. They are a cult. they can only survive as long as they are continually recruiting. So if we can get ahead of them and educate a population and educate our community against their hate and their beliefs, they have no power in our community.
Great. This has been really great. We want to get to some questions. Camille knows if we have questions to get you some time in the breakout. We're kind of running out of time, like it always happens, right? So I'm going to put something else in the chat, which is a piece of literature, a PDF from the Southern Poverty Law Center that is 10 ways you can counter hate in your community. Just some resource that you can take with you afterwards, because I feel like you've been sort of bathed in bad news. So, Camille.
Awesome. Wow. Very, very rich panel. Could just sit and listen, a lot to digest and process. There are a couple of questions, and I think I'll, just with regard to time, Gail, like, how much time would you like to have for small groups, even though
Well, at least 20 minutes, right?
Yep. Okay. All right. So we'll have a few minutes for questions here, and then we'll just make a commitment. I'm looking at Becky and Christy to I've got the questions in a Word document and in our follow-up email. If our panelists or you, Gail, wouldn't mind taking a look at them, so that folks can get answers to their questions, even if we don't get to it in this forum today. So with that, our first question, I'm just going to read them as they came in. Our first question is, can we get the names of the instigators and or the groups in order to have them on our radar?
We could do that. That one document that came out and we can put that in the email that comes out to you afterwards, called the Propaganda Mill, lists a lot of the people that are doing this work in the state.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So yes, one of the pre-resources, we'll make sure to reiterate it in the follow-up email, can have that information. Awesome. Next question was, could you please talk more about the involvement of the school board in the Willmar events? So Dane, I think this is a question for you.
I will say I think they were put in a really difficult position, and maybe similar to what Victoria was saying, they have a policy of allowing any group that's, I'm not even sure if it's even nonpartisan, to participate in a school outside of school hours. And this is a very intentional strategy by Usama Dakdak and others to make these very public events in a place that makes the discomfort raise. I personally called the superintendent and he said, our lawyers have advised us we can't really do much here. It's not that we're going to promote this, and this would never be allowed during school hours, but this is kind of our policy, and that's where he left it. That's my understanding. Someone else from Willmar might have a different take, but that's how I heard it.
This is Jaylani. I can briefly add. So this battle has been going on with these groups since Bagley, Minnesota. And in fact, in Bagley, the school board shut down one of their events. And then there was a risk of a lawsuit. And that's when many of these schools are now in a position. So the traditional workaround is for them to have no hate in any of these events. And if these groups are doing that, then that risks the children and students, right? So the problem right now is all these school boards have a pretty open policy with renters who are outside, but private actors can do different things. So obviously government is limited in how they can censor. So there is some challenge there, but right now I think the battle is uphill for a lot of these school districts. They just don't have any policies in place that they can hold against them.
Thank you for that. Moving to the next question. Interested in how these groups are allowed to propagate hate speech. Hate speech isn't protected by the Freedom of Speech Act. Is there a way to legally challenge these groups?
I'll take a quick crack at it. So first of all, the hate speech laws are more tougher when it comes to what the government can do. So can the government censor the church, for example, from having its church, or these speakers are speaking in a public government-run places? And the law is pretty strong when it comes to as long as they're not inciting violence. But I think we all are in a boat right now where we need to be much more careful about these laws and the way that government is playing a role in undermining the type of hate that could lead to insurrection, as we saw, and could lead to coups, and among other things. But as far as the private actors, I think there is a bigger opportunity there, where Facebook, your private event space, they can have much stronger anti-hate speech policies. So the private area is where we have the greatest opportunity to limit the role that these groups have. And I think the pastor mentioned this a little earlier, but the push and pull when it comes to these hate speeches, it has to be two strategies. One is more public, protest events, public, and then a lot of it is actually private. And sometimes the private way of some of the community leaders saying, hey, we're not going to accept this in our community. If you do this, no more business. We're not going to work together. You're going to et cetera. So there's that private behind the doors type of activism that can be very powerful, which, by the way, happens in other places. So if you think about some of the different types of what happens, you could see that there's a better way to respond to it.
Hey, Camille, I think we need to get people in their groups.
Yep, that was my next move. So thank you for that. We will respond to your questions via email. As we go into small groups, just want to call our attention back to our 4 agreements. Our small groups are not going to be moderated. So it's very important that we hold the space together in the spirit that we intended to enter this conversation. So staying engaged, speaking our truths, and from our perspectives, experiencing discomfort, accepting non-closure. I will just also add that if you're needing a bit of extra support in your small group, you can request the host and someone will join you there. All right. So with that, I will turn it back over to Becky to break out into small groups. Gail, if there's anything.
I just think our speakers are going to leave, so thank you to all of you. And it was great hearing from everyone.
Much appreciated. Much appreciated. Is there a particular prompt, or is this just time to reflect?
It's like, I think people to think about, how are they organized in their community or not organized? Is there a group like Dane's that's started, or do you need to start one? Just kind of think about your own community and how you're handling this current situation.
We've got everyone back. Welcome back, everyone. Hoping that you had very rich conversations, and just want to recognize that it's never enough time, and hoping that you take this as an opportunity to, again, make connections, continue these conversations outside of this space with one another, so that we're building kind of ripple effects in our communities. And then, as I see a couple of people are chatting in, our commitment to action. So as I mentioned earlier, likely not resolving much today, but thinking about what are the next action or 2 actions that we can take to incorporate and apply some of the things that we've learned and talked about. Also would like to just spend the last minute or 2 as we get ready to close out, to see if there is any announcements or events things that people would like to share, upcoming activities, additional resources. Would ask that you put those in the chat, or this is a moment where you can unmute yourself if you have an event coming up in the next day or so. Just want to give space for that. All right. Well, thank you. Join us, I believe, February 9th? I can't see. I got all your faces in front of me. Yes, February 9th, same time, same place. Registration link is in the chat. We're going to do part 2 of this series, interviews with rural Minnesota social justice workers. And our session in February will be on local media and equity. So please join us for part 2 of this series. Thank you all for being here. Take care of yourselves and one another. And we will see you on February 9th.